have to keep inventing and you have to keep showing people why you're here. It's about who's going to rock the spot tonight.
As the internet transitions to 3D, 8i brings you the best way to create and experience content in this new digital reality. 8i transforms regular video of real people into truly immersive 3D experiences for virtual reality, augmented reality, and the web. For the first time, you can move around them and experience a real emotional connection.
Wow.
We're on a mission to enable everyone to connect with each other in the closest way to real life.
Just wanted a video for you to see when you're grown and you have your own family.
Where you're not just watching someone, you're with them.
I have like goosebumps.
When you're looking at something created in 8i, it's that eye contact that you make with an individual. You're able to see the facial expressions.
There's an authenticity to it.
And they're going to become part of us that we leave behind.
You can literally be anywhere. It's no longer restricted space. It's effectively infinite space.
Pretty cool stuff, huh? Now you also know what 8i does, so maybe I'll give a bit of a background on 8i. So they're a Wellington-based company that the founders sort of grew out of Weta Digital, and started up a couple of years ago. Is it a year and a half, 2 years?
20 months.
20 months.
Yeah.
There you go. And they have operated and done something amazing, as you saw in the video. They have recently closed a significant raise of capital abroad in the States. I think it's about 20 million New Zealand dollars, so that's pretty big. And the names that they have on board as investors are also kind of awe-inspiring in a way, and like true champions in that field. So I let Toni talk more about that. But Toni is the COO of 8i. You know,
Cool. Well, hi everyone. As Laura says, I'm the COO of 8i. My name's Toni. A few familiar faces out there, but great to see all of you here. 8i is a company that I've been with since it began 20 months ago here in Wellington. We've now got a team in Wellington, but also a team in Los Angeles. About 2/3 of the company is here. Most of our engineering and HQ is here. But we do a lot of marketing and production work stateside. So I just wanted to, I'll start with a bit of a disclaimer. Unlike the earlier two speakers, I do not have a lot of experience about raising capital across a wide range of companies. In fact, 8i is the only company that I've ever raised capital for, and when I started out, I didn't know anything about it. But in 20 months, we've raised capital, I think of about 4 times. Each of those were quite different. We raised money in the friends, family, angel investor way when we started out with our seed investment round. We also raised money from the government through Callahan Innovation, which I think is helpful to build, like we heard from Dave earlier about thinking about, what's your capital raising strategy and looking out over several milestones, and it's often quite helpful to think of government funding and relationship building and all the things you have to do in the same way. We then did a convertible note followed by our Series A round. So you can see on those, the first couple of steps took us a couple of months each. The next 2 were much longer processes, which each took about 6 months. So I just want to share a few of the lessons I've got. There's heaps and heaps of interesting stuff in this process, but I'll just highlight a few insights that I have, maybe a few tactics, and we'll leave anything else for questions. I'm not going to go through all these details. The first thing I wanted to talk about was, well, how do you find investors anyway? You shouldn't wait until you're ready to raise money to start finding investors, and you should always have investors as part of your world, including current and prospective investors at all times if you're a startup CEO. So these are relationships that take a lot of cultivation. As we've already heard, it's important to build trust and familiarity, and you don't want to just turn up to talk to someone the first time that you're really asking for coming to them with a big ask. So, what I would say in the beginning, and this is something I really didn't know enough about, but there are lots of people in your community that you can ask, and the fastest way to figure out what to do is to go and ask people. Of course, there are books you can read, there's heaps of stuff online, but my experience has been that people in the community are more than willing to help, and in fact are kind of fascinated about this stuff. So look around you, learn about the investment community, but also learn about other people who are in related industries. They may have experience from raising money themselves, or if they've been successful, they might be investors, and investors really, really love to invest in things when they can see that they can add value, that they've got some relevant experience that they can bring to you. And I would say, you don't want to meet an investor and pitch to them straight away. So, think about the ways that you can more naturally form a relationship. It could be that you're asking for their advice and feedback on what you're doing, and that gives you a great entree to talk to them again when you've perhaps followed some advice, achieved a milestone, and you're ready to raise capital. And that also goes for government agencies too. And just beginning talking to investors and other startup companies leads naturally to other investors. You might need to look quite far afield, so you'd start locally naturally, particularly if you're an early stage company, but you might want to look elsewhere in New Zealand, or depending on the nature of your business, it could be Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, the US. These are all places that my company has touched upon in its capital raising journey. So be looking and making sure, just analyze investors, look at what else they've invested in. You should be really familiar with that. You should really think about who else is in your sector and who could conflict in and out. And just talk to a lot of people, and then focus in on the lovers, not the haters. If someone finds you not the least bit attractive, they're never going to fall in love with you. So apply that filter as you go through the process. Another interesting anecdote that I picked up from someone who is now one of our investors and board members is who should introduce you to the investors that you'd like to meet. So it's not really the most effective way to reach out to an investor to email them or respond to a form on their website or to cold call them. You'll be much more credible if you come to them with a good introduction. And so Scott Nolan would say that a great introduction would come from a CEO that has made money from the investor before, someone who is a close friend or a former employee of the investor, the CEO of a company that they're also invested in, or other people that are participating and investing in your company. Whereas introductions from people that are paid to advocate for you, some people would say that your lawyer could introduce you to investors. Often they know a lot. Others would say try to find another route. Investors who have passed on the opportunity to invest in you, or the kind of cold calling. There are exceptions to those rules. I'm not saying it can never work out, but I would use those options more as a later resort if the earlier options don't work out. In the process, you've got to be prepared to kiss a lot of frogs. More people will say no to you than will say yes to you, even if you've got an awesome team and the market's great and your idea is really, really cool. There are countless examples of really successful companies, Google, LinkedIn, who got declined many, many, many times in their capital raising process. And so I guess raising capital is something that requires tenacity, perseverance. Just because people say no to you doesn't mean that you should be too discouraged. Also, but just be aware that a lot of people act like they really like you and they do want to invest in you, but investors are kind of motivated to keep all of their options open until they've decided that they're really, really not interested. So you can't really count on anyone as an investor until you've got their money in your bank account. So you've got to keep up the work, keep filling the pipeline with potential investors until the process is really closed off. Allow plenty of time. I think it's extremely common for startups that capital raising as a process takes more time than what you'd expect. There are, of course, cases that where the process happens really quickly, but I would say that's the exception rather than the rule, and it's likely to take longer than you expect. Even if the process of pitching the company takes just a few weeks or a couple of months, often the due diligence process can take much longer. There are certain things that you can do to help speed up the process. Some of these things that other speakers have already talked about. You've got to be really prepared in due diligence. You need to anticipate their questions, respond really quickly, but have time up your sleeve. You do not want to end up in a position where you're running out of money. It's a really weak negotiating position to be in. So always start thinking about capital raising nice and early, and allow like twice as long as you think you're really going to need to raise the money. Just by way of preparation, I would say, you know, there are lots and lots and lots of details that you can be prepared around, but really the two most important things that you should have are your pitch deck and your demo, product demo. I'm not going to go into the details of what should be in your pitch deck, except to say that there's heaps of great information online. Go and check that out, and then workshop your pitch deck with other experienced people. Practice the pitch. It can feel really uncomfortable, but that's the best way to get feedback. Practice it with people who are actually investors and let them help you shape it. This part is a little bit as well. I just kind of want to say something about who you are in this process, right? And who the investors are. And in both cases, you are still yourselves. This is another slide I borrowed off Scott Nolan because I think it's pretty funny, and I kind of imagine him. He's an investor at Founders Fund and has this really serious looking office, but everyone's just wearing yoga pants. And I think lots of eager startup companies come in dressed really, really formally, which in certain environments is a little bit artificial, but like you want to be kind of smart and prepared, but also you want to know your investor, right? So in certain markets, dressing one way will be really appropriate and others not. But really my message there is kind of be yourself. You're, at the end of the day, you're a person, and investors are just people too, even though they can seem really intimidating. This is a picture I took of one of the 8i co-founders during our last round, and you could go into investor boardroom and it's super expensive, and the cost of the table in the boardroom is worth more than your whole company, and they might have names like this on the wall, and you could think, wow, like this is scary, what am I doing here? But it's really important just to remember that investors are people too. They're people with money. It might be other people's money, and you're kind of all there to have a conversation and do the job. So be yourself, and just really try to engage with them on a suitable level. In my experience, it's much better if you can talk to your investors in more of a conversational tone rather than in a formal presentation tone. Again, it depends on the environment. So my sense is that, you know, if you're in a more kind of formal incubator like Lightning Lab, well, they've got a process where you kind of pitch more formally. But in other scenarios, it can be really valuable just to build a rapport with your investors by having a conversation. And a good meeting should look like a thorough and robust conversation about your team, your company, and your pitch. That is not to say that you shouldn't have a great pitch deck, which you can refer to in your conversation, or that you shouldn't be entirely prepared to give a really, really polished pitch if you are called upon to do so. And that could happen at any time. You could go in expecting a conversation, and a partner could say like, hey, why don't you just give me the pitch? So you need to be prepared for both, but if you can end up in a conversational approach, I think that can work really effectively. The other side of this is the demo. Always have enough people at the pitch meeting to deal with the inevitable scenario of the demo failing. It happens to everybody, especially if there's some kind of technical element to what you're doing. So I think, you know, as well, pitching is not really a one-man show. You've got to approach that as a team. But there are a lot of investors who would say, you know, I believe like second traction, which I thoroughly agree is the most significant metric you can point to get investors across the line. Certain investors are really put a lot of emphasis on the demo and the quality of the experience that gives them. So you should be aiming to do everything you can to showcase your product or your concept in the best way that you can. Yeah, I just wanted to say something about the process and how you can keep it rolling and keep up momentum, and to a certain extent I've already touched on this, but it's really easy to go to a meeting, have a great pitch, but there might be no pressure on the investors, and for you, you really need to find the ways that you can to keep the ball rolling. So when you're coming out of a meeting with an investor, whether it's a kind of a general meeting where you're building a relationship or a pitch meeting, you should always be clear on what the next steps are to follow on from that. And typically that should involve you doing something for them that puts the ball in your court and gives you a reason to talk to them again really soon. It really helps to email them again the same day, and if you've offered to provide the materials for due diligence, I'd always aim to provide those within 24 hours. You can be prepared, you'll have your Dropbox with everything in it, and then the investor will ask for something else that you didn't think of, and in that case you really need to scramble and get that work to them as quickly as you possibly can if it's something that you think is relevant, because what your investor is looking for is assurance that you're really prepared and that you're a company that's done the thinking that they think appropriate for your business, rather than making it up and getting it to them 3 weeks later. And I would also just say, like, it's helpful with investor meetings as well to not kind of be stuck in meetings which have a dynamic, which have no natural close. You don't want to linger there for too long. It can actually be quite helpful to be prepared to close off the meeting, leave with next steps. Maybe you've got somewhere to be, and always leave the conversation in a way that it's in your court to keep it open with them. In the process of raising a round as well, you'll get to a point where you've kind of talked to enough investors, there seems to be good interest, but it can be quite likely that like no one is quite taking the plunge, or not everyone's taking the plunge, and it could be dragging on for a long time. And you might get to a point where you kind of have to make a call, okay, we're really going to try to close this round, or we're going to do something else. We're going to like shelve the round and go and meet some more milestones and try again later, because you don't want a round to go on forever and ever just in the pitching stage. So techniques that I found helpful for this really are just having some degree of traction with other investors. So you might wish, although it's like very helpful to have a lead investor, of course wonderful if you've got a term sheet, you can try other tactics too. So for instance, you might have certain investors that have come in early, so that you can say that the round is partially subscribed, so you might begin to take in money, which will give other investors kind of more confidence. Or you could have strategic investors lined up who would be willing to follow on a lead investor. And also, you know, you can talk about quite achievable micro targets as well that your company will be working on during this process of the capital raise, so that you've got further things that you can highlight to people and help create urgency. And what you want to create with investors is fear of missing out. And kind of in that vein, I developed this slide. What do these things have in common? So this is an investor, and this is a character from like a video game popularized in the 80s. And this, I found, after some research, is a real lemming, a real thing. So all of these things are kind of like lemmings, like they won't go anywhere, but eventually one will, and then everyone else will follow. Or at least that's kind of a common dynamic. So, and that's because investors like the assurance and validation of other investors wanting to be part of something. So really, once you do kind of get a bite in the process, or once you've got a term sheet, that is your time to like go to work really quickly, herding up the other investors. So like it's going back to everyone that you met, everyone you liked, saying, there's a term sheet, it's on, do you want to be part of the round, do you want to offer an alternative term sheet? And actually once investors get a signal like that, things can begin to move quite fast, but especially if you're doing your job well and you're always doing your communication successfully. Yeah, I won't say too much about this. It kind of just relates to the investors you choose and thinking about looking to the future with your investment. But I would say, far more important than the valuation that you achieve is the quality of the investor that you bring in, because as Laura said, it's going to be a long-term relationship, and you want someone who can bring to your company much more than just money. You want people with networks, with advice, and or depending on what your company is, that's what you should be looking for. Of course, there's a limit. Valuation is important. Other terms are also important, but the quality of the investor, I think, to me, is the most important thing of all. That, yeah, it can relate to expertise, but they've also got to buy into the culture of your management team and of your people, and there has to be a good relationship there. If they are a known brand, for instance, they can be really helpful with bringing in other investors, both in the current round and the future round, so it's also something to think about. We've talked about this, I'm just saying, with this, really think about the future when you're doing investment rounds. I guess the, investors will always want favourable terms for them in the round, and they're incentivized to ask for a lot. As Dave was saying, there can be really good reasons about that, and you've got to be prepared to discuss all of the terms. But also, you don't want to do anything in one round that will really compromise your ability to bring in investment in subsequent rounds as the company goes through different stages of maturity. So if you're going to have a whole lot of complex terms and rights and discounts and things for early investors, your company is not going to be as attractive to the investors that you might want to get later on. So you've got to just have the right balance there. My final message is enjoy the ride as well. I've had some amusing experiences in the capital raising process, days where I felt really despondent, days where I felt jubilant. This is a picture of our team with this guy who's the producer of a television show called Silicon Valley, and this VC thought it would be really funny to bring the TV show guy to our pitch. It actually turned out to be really funny because we actually, if you know the show, one of our core pieces of IP is a compression algorithm, and so we got to this discussion, and we were like, wow, this is really super art imitating life, imitating art, craziness, all just like season 2. I recently got invited to a VC who wanted a demo of our product. We're not raising right now, but it was one of these ongoing relationship things. Wanted to show him a virtual reality demonstration, and he turned up as a robot. And, and no one mentioned anything, no one said anything about it, like, hey, that's not really the guy here in person. He's wheeled in as a robot, and it's just his face on the screen, and you're like, how am I going to show that a virtual reality presentation? And you've just kind of got to smile and think this is funny and carry on. So this is all part of the awesome journey of being in a startup and being part of that team. So, and it's going to be really stressful, but have a sense of humor and enjoy the ride.
Awesome. Thanks, Toni.